you ask the question, should we maybe somewhat Europeanize these type of mechanisms? And as Europeanize is maybe a bit frightening to some of you, Emma found a solution and said, maybe it can just be 3 small steps to a regional approach, right? That already starts much less frightening. And it's even less frightening if you take those small steps together with 3 prominent panelists. So I don't know if it will be 1 step per panelist, but I'm very happy we have Miriam Stallone here from DG Energy. We have Daniel Inaj-Toth from Acer, and we have Marco Foresti from Ensui. Now, these are 3 important voices in this debate. There are more, I'm sure. Some of them are registered. That's why this will also be quite interactive. You will see that we will have polls around 3 questions that Emma will first introduce. And on each of the 3 questions, we will ask our panelists to intervene. Then there is also the opportunity to pick up maybe some questions from you. So don't hesitate to interact with us, submit your comments, your questions, and we'll try to pick it up. Either the panelists pick it up while they are talking, or if we still have some time at the end, we'll try to refer to it. That's it from me. So Emma is part of our team, and she will kick it off with an introduction now.
Thank you very much, Leo. And indeed, I'm happy today to start by introducing our new working paper, 3 Steps to Regional Capacity Markets, which Leo just kindly introduced. So we started by looking at the state of play. So capacity markets have a growing role in the EU. Okay, sorry, there is an issue with the image. So basically, we expect more and more national capacity markets over the coming years. And so the question is, how do we achieve a cost-efficient adequacy framework? Well, we can think of 2 objectives. So first is, where should we invest in new capacity? If we look at the EU or the regional level, how do we select the cheapest capacity across borders that's unable to ensure our common security of supply? And the second question is, how much do we invest? So how do we avoid costly over or maybe even under procurement of capacity if we have so many national schemes? So we started by looking at the current framework. And basically, capacity markets now, they are operated and cleared at the national level. And so how do we account for a cross-border trade in these mechanisms? Well, we have the maximum entry capacity, so here called MEC. And so how does it work? Well, we have a fixed MEC value between countries, so it's 1 per border, or 2 actually, so for the 2 sides. And it's assessed based on the ERA, ideally, and then computed by RCCs. And so that's the way we do make this coordination across borders. So is it enough? So first thing we observed is that the scenarios of the ERA, maybe they were not fully accepted by member states for their procurement horizon in the past. But on this, we know that they will be improved with new scenarios that do account for capacity markets and trend scenarios. But in the meantime, member states do have to use national assumptions and assessments. And so you can see in this example, for example, in 2024, we had 2 different assessments for the MEC in Belgium. One was from Coreso, using the maybe ideal scenarios from the ERA, and then one from ELIA, which used the scenario that was more representative of the views and specificities of the country. And you can see that in some cases, they found higher values, in some cases lower. So there is a difference there. And another issue of relying on these modeling assessments is that we rely on estimated values that are quite uncertain. For example, the cost of new entry, to forecast where new capacity will or should be built. So here you can see in this example, for example, that in the last edition of the ERA, Belgium submitted a lower KONE than Germany. And what happened in the model is that there was a significant relocation of capacity from Germany to Belgium. Is it representative of what's the best for the EU? Maybe not. an interim solution was to use harmonized values, which also has its limits. So the question is, can we really use the ERA to do this kind of central planning exercise and then forecast in advance what will be the future imports? And another issue we found is that if we fix this import value ex ante and we have a sequential clearing, well, if we have errors in the assessment before, maybe it can result in a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. So here, for example, if we say we only need one new generator in A plus B, so either the orange or the blue one, here we want to select the blue one, which is cheaper. But if the ERA was, for some reason, improperly forecasted that more capacity will be in the orange country, and that country clears first, well, there are chances that it will select this more expensive generator because the imports from the blue country were underestimated. So it's just an illustration of how using fixed values can result in actual wrong procurements. So procuring in the wrong location. So what we propose is that we somehow pool all the supply bids together here with a single clearing. And then the selection of resources is based on cross-border bid-based competition. And in this case, we don't really need to estimate the MEC as it is done now before based on what already exists, and imports become more a result of the procurement process rather than an input. And single clearing is maybe simpler for market participants. Okay, so again, I don't know why the images seem to have disappeared from the slides. Other issues we have with the current framework is that we have demands that are nationally defined. So maybe we have political interference, and it remains possible for member states to over or under procure. And an example is when defining the reliability standards, and the image that is hidden, it was an image from the AITER report where the value of forced load in certain member states was found much higher in the national assessments than in the benchmarks computed by ACER. So there is a question on how much there is a political interference in the definition of these objectives. And another idea would be to focus, another issue is that they focus on national stress events, while we're very much interconnected. So maybe we should focus more on regional stress events. Another issue that we found is that most of the capacity markets have centralized demands defined by TSOs, also NRA's governments, but they have to deal with increasing uncertainty. For example, on the peak demand growth, we don't really know how much electricity demand will increase in the future, and consumers are not directly involved in the demand definition. That's why for step 2, we propose, for example, to have a regional demand definition rather than national one, so that member states would do the exercise together. And the idea would be to limit the political interference at national level and focus on regional stress events. And the last step could be to have a decentralized demand. In this case, it would also maybe enable to limit further the political interference and better include consumers. It's more a futuristic option, but if we think consumers will be really involved with smart meters, flexible uses in 10 years, let's say, then it's no longer so unrealistic. That's why we propose it. How can it look like in practice? Well, we have a kind of first example because Italy has multiple bidding zones and they have a couple capacity markets between their bidding zones. You can see that, so they have centralized demands for each zone, and then the demand can be procured also in the neighboring bidding zones. And you can see here that there are transfers between the bidding zones. In this case, there was a divergence between the prices between north and south. So that's how it works. So now we are aware that there are quite some barriers on the way. So we also touch upon that in the paper. First one is how do we converge on the capacity market designs? So here it's usually argued that capacity mechanisms are very different and they correspond to national specificities. On this, we have a more positive view that the biggest choices are already quite harmonized. And But to really harmonize further, we would need maybe regional initiatives to align on all the technical choices and methodologies. And another point is that we could have EU level defined availability periods, for example, using price-based criteria rather than saying, okay, it's I want availability during this month or this one. So we think it's possible. Then another very important point is how do we allocate consumers curtailment when we don't have enough resources. And on this, we think it would be good to clarify curtailment rules because there seems to be a lack of clarity on when do we share curtailment across countries or where do we do local matching. A third very important point is how do we define the scenarios of the future to define the demands, the rating factors, so all the capacity markets parameters. So of course, we already have the EU adequacy assessments being improved, but national scenarios and sensitivities are sometimes still used. We argue that an in-between, so to move away from the national ones, could be to have regional adequacy assessments. We saw that there are some initiatives in the Nordic countries, for example. So it could be a good way to have an acceptability of the scenarios. And a final point is that if we do something at a regional or even the EU level, of course, there would be questions in terms of national autonomy. If we want to limit cross-border dependencies and make sure that the system is resilient, it's possible to have a regional scheme, but considering, for example, minimum national constraints, more or less binding. So it's not necessarily a barrier. It all depends on how we implement the mechanism. That's it for me. If you want to know more, I invite you to check out our working paper. This is the overview of our assessment. Thank you. And now I leave the floor to the panelists and Leo.
Thank you, Emma. So you nicely clarified. It's not 3 small steps. It's maybe 2 relatively small steps and maybe 1 big, as you said, more futuristic step. But let's now break it down into 3 questions. And the first one, I think, is on the next slide, right? Okay, so Emma presented a view on why you might want to go to regional capacity markets, right? Capacity markets across national borders. She argued that it can help to avoid under or over procurement of generation capacity. She also said it can help to select cheapest generators across borders. Even if you over procure, at least you over procure cheaply, right? Or maybe you have other reasons in mind, or you really are not convinced and you say, no, let's just keep it national. Then the last option is your option. I'm very curious to see the results. Here we are. So there are 20% saying, let's just keep it national. All the others are convinced. Most choose then, if they are convinced, for some of the arguments that Emma outlined, but I'm also very curious about the 11% that have other arguments and to know what the panelists think. I think on this one, Miriam was going to go first. Miriam, please.
So many thanks, Leonardo, for giving me the floor, and many thanks, Emma, for the clear introduction and the interesting findings from the paper. Allow me to take first a step back, reminding that before the introduction of capacity mechanism rules from the Clean Energy Package back in 2019, capacity mechanism used to have a very domestic connotation and nature and dimension. And it's important to acknowledge that, as we did at the time, that capacity mechanism not open to capacity providers from other member states risk distorting cross-border competition, trade, as well as investment signals, resulting in the increase of the overall system costs. And the rules introduced at the time, especially the requirement on explicit cross-border participation, aimed at addressing all these issues and to ensure that the contribution of cross-border exchanges to security of supply is fully taken into account to avoid over-procurement, to minimize the system costs. In the meantime, as Acer has also issued a methodology that assist member states in the implementation of this requirement and which provides technical specifications to allow member states to implement this rule in an harmonized manner. However, what we have witnessed so far is that member states are either lagging behind in the implementation of the rule or are applying it in a simplified way. And capacity mechanisms sometimes do not allow for an effective participation of cross-border resources on equal footing with domestic capacity providers. When it comes to the core proposal from your paper, Emma, about the integration of capacity markets across borders, this idea would go a step further than the current requirements under the electricity regulation. And I do agree that the findings from the paper with the objectives of bringing down the costs of the mechanism by selecting the cheapest generators across borders and avoiding the disproportionate volumes to be procured. As I pointed out earlier, these very same objectives are shared also by the current requirements under the electricity regulation. And in our current system, where we see more and more capacity mechanism being introduced by EU countries and then becoming and being recognized as a structural element of the market, it is crucial that member states start to implement the framework on cross-border participation in a coordinated and harmonized manner. The harmonized implementation of the framework would facilitate moving to the step further proposed by your paper, which is the integration of capacity markets across borders. And I believe the current legal frameworks provides the tools to make it happen. First, the European Resource Adequacy Assessment defines what is the need and the potential contribution of cross-border capacities. And second, the ACER methodologies for cross-border participation establishes rules to determine how much foreign capacity can participate, how revenues are to be shared, how foreign capacity providers are checked to ensure availability. And with that, I conclude my reaction on this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Very clear. And thanks also for outlining that regulatory framework in more detail. Acer was mentioned. I don't know, Daniel, maybe you should go next then.
Thank you. Thank you. And first of all, thank you for this paper, which I found very future looking, at the same time rather pragmatic, as long as step 1 and 2 goes, but step 3 is also very interesting, and I'm sure we'll comment on that later. Now, from our perspective, we see that in an interconnected market, security of supply is almost by definition is a cross-border matter. This is almost dictated by the laws of physics. What is not dictated by the laws of physics, though, at least to a large degree, are the challenges that stand between further coordination between capacity mechanisms. They come down mostly to design choices, which are choices, no, and not natural law. So this is why I think that going further down this line, further coordination is necessary. Will bring benefits, and we can, of course, take a lot of inspiration of the journey that we have taken with the internal energy market, where the welfare gains are huge, and maybe more recently the European balancing platforms can be also inspiring, where we just published our annual market integration report, and we are calculating 1.6 billion gain for welfare gain for 2024, just for kind of inspiration. We also have a security of supply report. This will be published tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, not sure, but definitely this week. And what I want to refer is that we do have a calculation on the coordinated dimensioning of capacity mechanisms. So mind you, this doesn't mean regional CM or pooling demand and supply. This is merely coordination, and we find that the additional capacity to be procured can be can be decreased by almost 70%. So check out the report later this week. Now, I do concur, having said all that, I do concur with Miriam that the first step just in front of us is to complete the implementation of the current framework, including the CSAF that came into effect recently, and Acer, together with NSOE, works currently on the streamlined methodology for ERA that will address some of the challenges that you also raised in the paper. So we see the way forward in terms of small steps, and I think we have a lot on our plate right now, and we are focusing at Acer on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Marco, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Leonardo and Emma, for inviting NSOE at this debate. I also share the compliments for your paper, very timely, very concrete. So maybe linking to the poll we just saw earlier, good to see a diversity of views. Panelists cannot reply to the poll, but I would have had a difficulty choosing the option. Maybe I would have selected maybe, or it depends on what we mean exactly with the regionalization. I mean, of course, as TSOs, we do see the benefits of more coordination, more streamlined design. This is something we have identified in our recent policy paper on capacity mechanism published this year. But we also see some of the barriers or obstacles that we need to solve before going further. Maybe one aspect I can shed light is on the for people that selected other. So other potential benefits that we see from a TSO perspective of at least more coordination and streamlining. So for us as TSOs that we're closer to the implementation of this mechanism, we see that more coordinated design, at least in certain aspects, would definitely facilitate coordination of TSOs. So for instance, on the product definition, pre-qualification, derating penalties. Of course, some of these have implications for security of supply standards. So they have also some national specificities, but there is work to be done there. There's potential for more streamlining. Secondly, we see closer integration or possibly in the longer run regionalization could bring advantages if it leads to more practical approaches for cross-border participation. I think you've identified well in this paper and also in a previous paper that the current approach has certain shortcomings with explicit participation, at least in some cases, also the MAC calculation. So we see potential for improving those rules in the future, and this discussion can hopefully take us there. Then, of course, you mentioned already other aspects. So the advantages for market parties, capacity providers, if we can have a more standardized framework, could facilitate also cross-border competition and potentially lower the procurement costs. So we started discussing in NSOE these benefits, but also the potential downsides. And even some of our TSOs are assessing what could be the options available and the implications. So very happy to be part of this debate, which will probably stay for us with for more months and years, and then hopefully lead us to something more concrete on implementation on the ground and also European regulation possibly.
Great. Thank you, Marco. So you convinced me. There is another. It's simplification and reducing transaction costs, for instance. Yeah, that's also an important dimension. And yeah, we're writing history here, right? If this picks up in the coming months, we'll look back on this. Okay, let's go to the next question. Question 2 is on these steps, right? So still, you are allowed to express that you're not convinced of the benefits and that you would prefer to keep the status quo. So that's selecting step 0. Or if you are already convinced that the first step is the way to go, or you're like, no, 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 let's go all the way to the second or even the third step, right? So where are you? How many steps are you willing to take? And I think if we would have asked the same question some months ago, we would have had a very different result. At least that's my feeling, that minds have evolved on this topic. Okay, so still 20% prefer to stay where we are, but there is a nice spread, right, of people willing to go to step 1, 2, and even 12% going to step 3. Okay, on this one, I think Daniel was the volunteer to come in first. Daniel, please.
Yeah. And I hope I will not disappoint anyone, but I will keep on insisting a little bit on what's right in front of us, and this is the fast track CM path, and the redesigned ERA methodology, which is coming soon. And I just want to highlight a few steps on this way, and I think it will help to increase trust that capacities will be available in times of scarcity cross-border, which is the foundation of everything. And so we have to build towards that. And so how can ERA and the streamlined ERA help that? But first of all, I will start with highlighting that ERA is a bottom-up and top-down process at the same time. So all the information is coming from TSOs, from the ground up, the ones that know the best their systems. And this is the basis for then where ENTSO-E will come in with some centralized parameters, very few, I must say, and only where it makes sense to then come to a result. So this process where all TSOs are involved, the European level is involved, there is a stakeholder consultation, I think is an important element to build that trust. And we should go beyond what we have today, and we will have some element on in the new methodology how to increase transparency. Now, the second element is we will introduce a new scenario, which is called trends and projections. There were some doubts in previous ERA editions that the central scenario may be overly optimistic. It's based on the national energy and climate plans. So this trend scenario will be departing from that, and will show a different reality, one which is based more on the current trajectory, which may be a bit more conservative. So I think that will increase the element of trust as well in the process. And lastly, and here we link to the fast track directly, we expect ERA to provide coordinated CM parameters, including derating factors, for example. And this was one of the examples in the paper where the diverging derating factors, and sometimes derating factors that are used to achieve certain goals in certain member states, is an impediment to further coordination, and we do agree. So among other parameters, derating factors will be available based on ERA. So all those, maybe micro steps compared to what you're proposing will hopefully lead us to more coordinated approach. And like I mentioned, only a coordinated, not joint, but coordinated dimensioning will greatly reduce the potential for the over dimensioning. And then we can go further from that, of course, but let's see.
Let's call it a warm-up exercise to take some of these steps, Daniel. That's good. You don't want to, strain yourself while taking these important steps. So you need some stretching. Who wants to come next? Marco, please. We don't hear you, Marco. I don't know what happened. I see you unmuted, but something else has been done.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was saying, I think my reply would be in a way similar to what Daniel said. So it's hard to say now how far we can go. I think the debate is right, and maybe the direction of travel is the right one as well. But it's too easy to, it's too hard at the moment to say how far we can go. So let's start with some micro steps, as Daniel said. I think there are some aspects where we can facilitate at least a technical level, even discussing with the TSOs, NRAs, Commission, a stronger coordination among the design of capacity mechanisms. We're already having that discussion also thanks to the CISAF. And some of maybe of these design features can be, if not completely harmonized, at least made more coherent. Thinking, for instance, the pre-qualification processes, the penalties, the auction timings. Secondly, again, I would insist on rules on cross-border participation. That's for us is essential to improve and make more practical. They often represent the single biggest complexity for implementing a capacity mechanism, and of course their well functioning is inherent to this with this debate. After that, I think further progress will depend on how mature discussions are at regional level and at European level. I think we are at very early stages here. If we compare it with electricity markets, where there was long discussions about target models. I remember spending years discussing intraday auctions versus continuous trading, or NTCs versus flow-based. Finally, we did agree a target model, and then helped us to move further. And then there was a combination of bottom-up initiatives and top-down guidance. If there is clear benefits that can be achieved, initiatives will develop on the ground. Maybe starting with just a subset of countries as a kind of a pilot projects, and then if we see by experience that things develop in the right direction, then more countries would join, and we could also transpose this lesson into some European regulation. Obviously, there are different levels of challenges to be solved, more technical, design related, implementation related, which TSOs, NRAs, and the Commission can solve also with the market parties. Others are more political, so they require especially member states to get together to find agreements that can facilitate maybe these further steps listed on the slide. So as say technical experts, we can also help identify those gaps that will need to be solved at the political level. Not everything can be taken at technical level.
Thank you, Marco. And now, Miriam, are you going to surprise us by putting exact dates on each of these steps, or?
No, indeed, like as said earlier, the paper is timely, as the idea of integrating the capacity markets across borders, or better known as regionalization, we have seen it has attracted growing interest and tension from European stakeholders. And the three-step recipes towards regionalizations are interesting, and we are interested to see how the thinking evolves on the issue. The discussion on regional CM is very much ongoing, and indeed we're also reflecting on it on our side and how it could work. And I must say that regional capacity mechanisms are not per se excluded under the current framework. And as also suggested by Marco, we haven't seen any concrete examples, pilot projects that implement on the ground, especially between several interconnected EU countries that apply capacity mechanism at the moment, and that share highly simultaneous scarcity period within the same region. In case of a regional capacity mechanism, the member state would have to develop and implement rules on how to share the costs, and the experience in other fields has shown that there are challenges faced in developing the cost-sharing methodologies. Moreover, such mechanisms should not distort cross-border flows and the functioning of the internal electricity markets. Also, it is important to consider what would happen in case of regional supply shortage. As said earlier, we share the achievement of the final objectives, which is to lower down the cost by selecting the cheapest generator across borders, addressing the issue of disproportionate procurement of volumes. And for that, I believe that a gradual harmonization of the design of capacity market would facilitate better in the integration of these mechanisms and the regional approach to ensure security of supply within the same region. I believe that a step in the right direction has already been provided in the context of streamlining the approval of capacity mechanism, where the Commission has proposed in CSAF the Annex 1, a checklist based on the best practices from approved schemes. And these already provide guidance that can be used off the shelves from member states to introduce capacity markets in an harmonized manner and in full compliance with our rules. Among the off-the-shelf features, as also Daniel has mentioned earlier, there are the use of derating factors based on ERA, relying on ERA to justify the need and dimension the scheme, relying on ACER calculation to define the security of supply target. And I believe that the more the designs of current capacity mechanisms tend to converge with regards to the implementation of cross-border participation requirement, the more we could draw lessons on how to best implement integrated capacity mechanism across interconnected countries in a region. For sure, there are interesting ideas that are in the paper, and we will be looking at them in the context of the white paper as possibility to enhance cross-border participation and integrate capacity markets across borders. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Miriam. So we're looking forward to the white paper, and meanwhile, we'll be looking for a pilot. I don't know if the Italian representatives in the audience are willing to take another bidding zone from one of their neighbors, because as Emma presented, they basically have already a multi-zone system, right? So they just need to cross the border and we would have a pilot, or someone else will have to volunteer. Okay, but before we do that, let's go to step 3, because barriers were already mentioned. Emma tried to anticipate some of the barriers some of you would raise and already started to share ideas on how to deal with it. But still, we would like to know from you, what do you think are the main barriers, right, to this regionalization? Is it the converging to a single harmonized design or product? Is that really preventing us? And that can go within one type of mechanism, but it's also, we still have different mechanisms, right? We have capacity markets, we have strategic reserves. So also that is still an issue. Is it about trusting the availability of imports during common scarcity periods? Is that what's keeping us back? Or is it agreeing on a common scenario of the future, which is needed as input to the procurement, right? The level of procurement. Or is it the fact that we just prefer to have local capacity, even if it costs more? We're happy to pay that extra cost. So which one is the biggest one for you? Okay, so yeah, there is one where the trust seems to be the biggest issue, winner. And then the second one is that we simply prefer local, even if it's more expensive. And the other two seem to be less of an issue, according to the audience. But let's see what our panelists think. Marco. Same thing happening again, Marco. It creates some additional suspense, you know?
Sorry, is my headset muting on its own? Yeah, quite aligned with the results of the poll for what concerns me. I think the paper already identifies well what are the main barriers: political acceptability, the curtailment rules, and both of them are, of course, very much linked to trust. So I think the first and maybe most obvious obstacle or barrier is the fact that we have European treaty where security of supply is a national responsibility, and maybe that should remain so until we have this institutional setup. So that's also linked to different adequacy standards, different scenarios, different risk preferences across countries. So that's going to be difficult to change. So we probably go only further up to a certain way. More practically, I think the trust issue is a major block to further progress. So how do we manage scarcities across borders when there is a simultaneous scarcity to neighboring countries? Do the presence of capacity mechanism in one or both countries affect these rules or not? We know we have already rules in place, for instance, in the EUFEMIA algorithm on how curtailment sharing is done. This is on a voluntary basis and also probably is not fit for purpose for a situation where more and more countries will have a capacity mechanism. So without fair, transparent, clear rules on curtailment sharing and also on cost sharing, it would be difficult to convince member states to do things more in common. Otherwise, there's always be the risk of free riding, for instance. And lastly, linked to the first category, so converging towards single harmonized product design, that's of course also a significant barrier, but it's maybe more on the technical side. There are things, as I mentioned earlier, that could be easier to streamline, coordinate. Others in the design of capacity mechanism, which are more specific to national adequacy issues, so the stress periods, and so also the delivery periods. How do you define availability, the D rating as well? Some things can be defined more at the regional or European scale, but others are very country specific. And lastly, also the financing and cost sharing of this mechanism, which they still remain very different. So these for the barriers. For the solution, so how do we overcome these barriers? Well, first of all, I think having these debates is the first step in the right direction. Having papers like the one of the FSR, and so he also wrote a paper. I think Euroelectric is going to come out soon with another one. So this debate, I think they help us assessing what are the opportunities, the risks, the main barriers. And from the technical expert level, then we need to raise awareness to the policymakers and hopefully encourage them to discuss these issues and try to find adequate solutions.
Thank you, Marco. Who goes next?
I can also come in.
Please do.
So, yeah, first of all, I would say that, again, echo the compliments for the interesting proposals that are under consideration. So the regional supply pooling provides valuable insights on how to select the cheapest generation across multiple countries. And the two alternatives, either of defining the demand at regional or decentralized level, try to address the issue of over and under procurement. While on the other end, we already set the ground in the right direction to make this happen. For instance, we have the target model under CSAF that aims at providing forward visibility to the national authorities, to investors on the design elements. And this may also drive to more harmonization in capacity mechanisms. Thanks to this, I think already some power plants operator willing to participate in more than one scheme or in integrated capacity market has the visibility on the competitive bidding processes in all concerned countries and can react and invest accordingly. Up to now, the member states have not applied the common approaches when setting their own reliability standards. Setting a high bar in terms of cost to ensure their own system, their own consumers against power cuts. And to tackle this with the streamlining report, we have tasked ACER to calculate the metrics to help the member states in setting this reliability standard in a coordinated and harmonized manner. The methodology also under the review ensures that foreign capacity is taken into account while dimensioning the capacity mechanism and will allow more flexibility in demonstrating the need for a capacity mechanism with the additional central reference scenario as mentioned earlier by Daniel. On the other hand, however, I see different challenges that can be faced in the regional approach, as also outlined in the paper, but there is no clear-cut answer or solution available at the moment. For example, how would the scheme identify an adequacy concern for the region and properly account for simultaneous for situations of simultaneous scarcity in the whole region? Currently, the ERA provides granular data on the capacity gap in each country with a specific zoom on individual bidding zones, and national adequacy studies are allowed to develop a more regional approach by the electricity regulation, even if until now this approach has been applied to set only domestic demand and not for the entire region. Also, the other question is who will check and what will be the benchmark to set a regional reliability standard and avoid over procurement at regional level? This is a national prerogative from member state that needs to be set in line with the ACER methodology and following a proposal from the national regulator. Then also how to ensure that there is an agreement from the different countries in the region on the applicable common design, including how to dimension the regional capacity mechanism. Another question is also how to equally distribute the cost across the different countries that would benefit of the resources and to whom the resources should provide their availability services, especially in times of scarcity. It's also crucial, as I said earlier, that regional capacity mechanisms do not have a detrimental effect to cross-border flows and to market coupling. All in all, I think that the 3 steps towards regionalization already propose a gradual approach for a potential implementation of it, and we're interesting to see how the thinking evolves on it. So that is it on my side.
Thank you, Miriam. Daniel, please.
Indeed. So all of these points are very relevant here, and in my mind, the process towards more coordination can take 2 forms parallel. Probably the one is the more political level, where trust has to be built based on discussions, but also based on thinking about how to evolve the governance framework, because without a proper governance framework, it's difficult to trust one another, right? So starting from what Miriam says, what is the region? What is my region? And who should I turn to? Who will organize the auction? Who will set the standard? And many questions are abound. Is it do they correspond to the RCC regions or not? So all this needs to be explored. And in the meantime, maybe a little bit more technical level, I think we all recognize that one key challenge is the design heterogeneity. And I started by saying this is not, this doesn't come from heaven. These are choices that we all make. And as we make these choices and look back to the experience of different member states, I believe some best practices emerged, and this we can observe in the penalty regimes, for example. One interesting aspect where we already see that some work better than the others. And the other is the derating factors I already mentioned. We see huge swings in the derating applied to certain technologies in one or another capacity mechanism, or between or in the same capacity mechanism between years. This is not conducive to to build trust and coordination. So we should look at all those instances and find those best practices. And again, I link back to the ERA and the ERA streamlining. There we can gain some insight. Given that with all those parameters and the heterogeneity, there is a high risk that cross-border participation is impeded, or there could be some gaming behavior, choosing which capacity mechanism do I participate in. So I think the discussion can continue on those. Maybe one word about the MEC, so the maximum entry capacity, which featured in your paper. And indeed, the MEC is a statistical calculation of how much my neighbor can contribute to my security of supply, right? So it is based on ERA today and then calculated by RCCs, and we do see some issues, and you do recognize some issues as well. But I have to add here that what we see today is the first iteration of those MEC values based on the first approved ERA. So I would say we should give it a little time to see where that it stabilizes. And I will highlight one important benefit of the MEC, and this is that it is coordinated, is the same MEC that I see to my neighbor, or not the same, but is coordinated, then vice versa. Whereas if we all did it ad hoc on our own, it would not lead to any benefit. So some challenges there as well as on design, but I'm positive that we can converge towards a more optimal coordinated CM framework.
Thank you, Daniel. And thanks to our panelists for being so disciplined, which allows us to do two things. I think first, Emma, if you want to react to anything you've heard, I'll give you the floor. But meanwhile, I'll already invite our panelists to also have a look at the really good questions we got. And in the chat, there is also sometimes a comment, sometimes a question. So I would invite each of you to pick up at least one of these questions that you feel comfortable in replying. And the same for you, Emma, if you want to say something on what you heard from the panelists, or if you don't want to react to that, but you prefer to pick up a question, go ahead. Emma, you can start.
Yes, thank you, Leo, and thank you very much to the panelists. It's super interesting to hear your views. Maybe I can just react by acknowledging that indeed maybe we're reflecting on a more forward-looking approach, but it's true that there are a lot of great developments now in the short term. So with the ERA being improved with more representative scenarios, and also it's true what you were saying that the MEC maybe will be it's the first iteration, right? So it's not like it's a long-lasting issue. Maybe in the future it will be the RCC values will be used by member states. But on this, what we say is that even if the MEC was perfectly calculated, the fact that we do compute it in advance and fix it maybe 4 years ahead before the procurements can lead to a conceptual issue. What we say is that ideally it would be the result of the procurement process, what we exchange between countries, rather than the inputs that we compute based on a modeling exercise. But I guess there are a lot of options in between. Maybe I'll leave the floor if you want to pick questions there.
Yeah, indeed. So if the panelists have had time to have a quick look at the questions, we can just go one by one. Who wants to go first? If Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I see two different questions. I can try to reply to the two of them. One is from Gillian Backlin. So who pays the bill of the procurement cost? Will the German electricity user pay willingly a greater network fee? And so this one question. And also the other one is like, at what level should the EU seek to adopt any measures to develop regional capacity mechanisms? What kind of EU level instrument might be achieved? More of a soft law, guidelines, looking for more binding legislative instruments to ensure uniformity, commonality, and where this can be agreed. I mean, these are very relevant questions. As earlier, I already made the point of the costs. Right now, we don't have an harmonized approach. What we're trying to do also in the context of streamlining is trying to get there, because I believe really like regionalization is like the step we can take once we have an harmonized approach. And from the question from Angus, I mean, right now, as I said earlier, the current framework does not prevent member states that are in a single regional area that experience simultaneous scarcity situations to introduce, to couple their capacity markets. They can do by applying the same designing rules defined by the regulation. There are some difficulties though with the definition of the dimension, with some definition of the technical parameters and so on. And in terms, well, we have different instruments, but right now, yeah, the more technical parameters are rather linked to the national approach for the time being. So if we would have to shift to the regional approach, probably those would need to be revised. But before that happening, I would also like, as said earlier, I would like to see pilot projects, things happening on the ground, also to learn and draw best practices. So that would be my reaction on these 2 points.
Thank you, Miriam. Who will go next? Daniel.
Maybe I can go quickly. I mean, too many questions. I didn't go through all of them. I couldn't, but maybe I pick up on the question about vol, CONES, the cost of new entry, and the reliability standard. I mean, whether there should be a single one for a region, this I don't know. But what I know is that we see it challenging to have coordinated values across member states, and it comes down to methodological issues. It's simply that it's very hard for consumers to value their own security of supply, and when regulators go and ask about it, even the way the question is formed, or even the order of questions, can make an impact on the results. So we did conduct a study, and we have found that there is a great diversity of this the value of lost loads, so how much I value my security results across member states, which even tenfold differences between member states. So this is probably one of the reasons the Commission, as Miriam said, tasked ACER to run a study where we take a single approach and see if what are the values we come up with. And similar to that, the cost of new entry, again, not easy to calculate it, but we give it a go. So you will see it on public consultation early next year. So then, having those values, hopefully the reliability standards can come closer to each other, and be more tractable and more interpretable in a way. So again, small steps from ACER, probably, as always, but I believe important ones.
Thank you, Daniel. Marco?
Thank you. Yes, I have 1 minute. I will pick one first from Alison Kelly. Do you anticipate locational investment signal would be acceptable within a regional market? I would say they are not only acceptable, but they would be desirable up to a certain level, at least. I think also the FSR paper touches upon this topic, and one of the possible suggestions is to have a sort of minimum national capacity requirements to avoid having capacity locating not enough evenly. And also, I think today's anyway, even without the national capacity mechanism, most countries, a certain degree of locational signal would probably be desirable to avoid aggravating congestions. The other point I want to pick up is more on the legislative changes. I think one person from the audience was suggesting that if we go towards a regionalization, that would involve taking steps towards enshrining CRMs as a structural feature of EU energy market, and we're not yet there. And also, we are talking here presumably about market-wide capacity mechanism, but others have pointed out there are some countries with strategic reserves, so that discussion we will need to have. And yes, I don't think the current regulatory framework is ready to have this type of regionalization steps. So certainly something will need to change.
Thank you, Marco. Emma, is there any burning thing you would still like to add or clarify?
Oh, thank you, Leo. I think, no time, but thank you very much again for all the very insightful comments and questions.
And as you have heard from everyone, this is only the start of a long process with a lot of additional questions. So I hope we will still have you to answer some of those questions. And with that, I'm happy to close. Thanks again to Emma. Really nice paper, good presentation, really nice discussion with our panel and a very active audience. And I'm sure we'll continue discussing